Which card game is actually the hardest to play? Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic, and Pokemon by TheDuelLogs.
A while ago, there was some drama about which game was more difficult to play, Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh. This drama went a few places, but the details there are less interesting than the overall question. What makes a card game hard? Is it the complexity of the individual turns, the complexity of the rule systems, or the multi-turn strategies that decks need to employ? Players from each of the three big card games will claim their game is the deepest and most skill-testing.
Me sitting over here laughing in Legend of the Five Rings. We played with 2 decks and 4 win conditions, not even on our level.
But is there any truth to these claims? Today, we're going to go over what makes Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, and even Magic the Gathering difficult and how they compare to each other.
Sure.
And see if we can find an answer to the question, what's the hardest card game? One major aspect of a game's difficulty is its complexity. And that's an obvious place to start this discussion. Starting with Yu-Gi-Oh, the game has many things that make it very difficult to get into and to master. Yu-Gi-Oh is famous for its high-powered combos and very complex rules, making it infamously difficult for new players to pick up. For one, the game has a ton of different summoning mechanics that new players have to learn. Fusion, Ritual, Synchro, Xyz, Pendulum, and Link summoning all come with their own quirks and rules, and to really play the game, you'll eventually have to learn how all of them work. On top,
It's also something to be said across editions. Well, I say editions, right? Across different master rule sets, certain things function inherently differently. Like pendulum summoning as it is now, from what I understand, is you get a single pendulum summon. Like you have a single instance of pendulum summoning to summon as many as you can. But prior, you could do that multiple times a turn. Like the different master rules and evolution of the game throughout the ages does also add to some of the complexity and some of the miscommunication as well.
on top of that, learning how to play a modern Yu-Gi-Oh deck is something that takes quite a bit of effort. Every Yu-Gi-Oh card is incredibly dense with effects text, and beyond knowing what every card does, you also need to know how a deck's cards interact with each other. This, at least for new players, usually amounts to either slowly building a base of knowledge by building your own decks, or by doing research into how certain decks are played.
Or you're just me, and like most other Yu-Gi-Oh players, we don't actually read what cards do. We kind of like what does Gaga Cowboy do, right? Detach 1 deal 800, right? But like, how many players have read Gaga Cowboy in the past like 5 years? Let's be real. Like, sure, you get accrued knowledge over the time, and like I play Yubel, right? At the end of the day, cool. Do I pop up with my Yubel combo doing first, or do you shut me out of the game? Bro, I don't even care what your deck does. How many Omnis do you have on board? Yes, no, right? I play the game fundamentally wrong. Let's put it that way. But like, he has the correct mindset. I think that this is the proper mindset when looking at the game at a fundamental level. But there's such a discrepancy between skilled and unskilled players, and I would firmly fall in the unskilled player bracket, in my opinion, personally, that it doesn't necessarily reflect the player base.
The latter being more common. It takes a lot of time to learn how to pilot a Yu-Gi-Oh deck with anything even approximating a degree of skill. The next most complex game of the three is Magic, which is debatably as complex as Yu-Gi-Oh.
Okay, I'm gonna need an explanation on that.
Try asking a new player how humility and opalescence interact if you want.
All creatures lose abilities, snap base power, toughness 1/1. Each other. So we're already going back to like early editions, right? Each other global enchantment is a creature with a power and toughness equal. I mean, so at this point though, it's just like grab the ruling at that point. Why would you sit there for 10 minutes trying to figure this out when, you know, the argument here is at a core level, try to RTFC and figure out how this works, right? Like, yes, there are always going to be interactions like this. There is interactions like this in Yu-Gi-Oh, right? What is it? Pole position and anything that's an equipped card that like increases attack beyond a certain threshold is going to cause an infinite loop. And okay, what's Yu-Gi-Oh's rulings for infinite loops here, right? What was the Guardian Chimera Book of Moon situation, right? Like, that's just interactions. Yes, you're RTFCing and the interactions will happen. I think Pokemon has less of these. I think Pokemon is the most new player friendly, and I think it does have the most streamlined performance. I really don't feel like you really run into this, at least in modern Magic. But then again, I have such a warped perspective because I also just play modern, right? Like I play Tron. Grats 1-2-7. Do I get my combo off? Am I actually able to ramp, or do I just fold? Right? I'm very binary with Magic.
Want to see proof of just how complicated Magic can be. Of course, these types of rule nightmares don't pop up in most games of Magic. This is a purposeful design choice on the part of Magic's designers, as this type of complexity is seen as a barrier to entry for new players.
Yes.
However, even when you ignore the heavy complexity of Magic's rule system, the actual rules of Magic are still more complicated than many other card games. Magic's mana system is by far the most complex of any card game with such a system. In order to cast
No. We want to talk about mana systems. Ooh, boy. Let's go talk about some Den of Iniquity, right? This is L5R, right? Den of Iniquity. It is a 2-cost holding. This card will not be destroyed. Card will not be destroyed. Other players will not lose honor from your spells. Okay, whatever. Battle this card. Produce 2 gold. So it's a 2. Effectively think like a 2-cost land that also produces 2. Political limited. Limited being something that you can use on your turn. Keyword political meaning is a political action. That's on the understanding in Magic. You have like, I don't know, like crab action or something like that. An action that designates that you having that keyword. Political action, bow this card, effectively tapping it, and target another player's dishonorable personality, dishonorable being a state that the card could be in. His controller loses honor equal to that base personal honor or 3, whichever is lower. You may not declare an attack this turn. When we talk about personal honor, we're talking about in Shadow Dragon, which is in part what my model is based off. Talked about this a number of times. We're talking about the fan is... Yes, the fan, because the red box here with the dash is honor requirement. You don't need an honor requirement, therefore it's a dash. 20 gold cost, 0 personal honor. I don't want to hear jack about Magic having a complex land system when it's RTFC, when L5R, in my opinion, was an objectively better game. I am actually upset every day this game no longer exists.
to spell a Magic, you have to produce enough mana from your lands. But on top of having enough mana, you also need mana of the right colors.
Sure.
A card like Rogue Refiner requires at least 1 green and 1 blue mana, and you have to properly tap your land to create the right colors of mana. On top,
my God, like, so imagine having a land, but instead of generating the mana, you're effectively tapping the land, and you're like, make artifacts your opponent controls lose -1/-1, right? Like that's in L5R, that's why your holdings existed. You had port market scheme in Emperor Edition, right? Where you're running your market, the keyword market, keyword port holdings to generate more revenue from I think it was like a colonial market or something like that. One of those for every holding that you had, land quote unquote that you had, you generated additional gold, right? Like I feel that the complexity with Magic is just not there. Like objectively. I'm playing what? Tron? Cool. Mine power plant tower. Grats. Sure, I can run things like Cascaded Cataracts to mana fix if I need to. But like, okay. Well, Kip, you're not actually playing Magic. You're playing something more akin to Pokemon. You'd be correct in that aspect. But like, cool. I'm playing Xenos from Final Fantasy XIV whenever he comes out, right? Grats. What am I playing? Playing black mana. Probably playing into that color a little bit, right? Oh, what? I'm only running like 6 black mana and like 10 red mana. Wow, my red mana is going to come up more than my black mana. Therefore, I might not be able to use Xenos as consistently as I'd want to. Like, so this is not me making fun of him, right? He is bringing across a compelling argument. But when we talk about Magic, I have such a unfavorable view of Magic. It's not even funny. Because L5R was strictly just better.
of keeping track of your colors of mana in order to cast your spells properly, you have cards like Lumbering Falls and Mirror Pool that have other useful activated abilities which you need to keep untapped in order to use.
Sure.
This alone creates a level of complexity while playing before you even get to the actual spells you're casting. Magic's mana system also introduces a type of decision making that Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon don't have, as rather than choosing just the order in which you play your cards, but instead only have so many resources that you can spend on your cards however you wish. This also has an impact on.
That is objectively untrue. Pokemon does have energy. You have to attach energy. You have to use deck slots. So in Yu-Gi-Oh, right, reasonably, you run your consistency cards, right? Your pots. Yeah, a lot of people running Fiendsmith because Requiem is such a big extender. That is an objectively untrue statement because in Pokemon, your deck construction does revolve around you having the necessary energy and digging for the necessary energy to be able to play the game. Like, your moves aren't free. There are free moves, right? See Scarlet and Violet format Badoo, right? Itchy Pollen, I think is its name. Yeah, it buys you like a turn or two for evolution decks like Dragapult, which I play. But like, I understand what he's saying, but Pokemon does have the energy system, which fills the same slot. It is your mana system for the game. Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have a mana system. Yu-Gi-Oh is the oddball out in the three.
How you interact with your opponent, as most of your instant speed interaction or quick effect interaction comes in the form of instant spells. In order to even be able to interact with your opponent on their turn, you have to choose to not spend your mana on your turn, which is yet another thing you have to consider when going about your turn.
Sure.
Still, most Magic decks are easier to pick up and play than a modern Yu-Gi-Oh deck, especially once you already know how to play a game of Magic. And finally, the least...
I hate how the stack works. Magic, your stack is broken. The fact that you can go like Doomblade, your opponent can Doomblade, you can Doomblade another thing, and then someone can counterspell. You resolve your counterspell, and then you can immediately throw a thing before the third Doomblade resolves, right? I hate how the stack works in the game.
Complex of these three games is Pokemon. Now, while the Pokemon TCG is the least complex of the three games, that's not to say it's simple. There's still quite a bit you need to keep track of on a given turn. While there aren't any cost to playing cards, you still have many restrictions. Item cards, which can be played from hand for no cost as many times as you want in a turn, have less impact than more restricted cards.
Depends on the format. That's why Catcher, Pokemon Catcher had to get errata to have a coin flip now, because Catcher in X and Y format was it X? No, it was black and white format, was busted.
Supporters may have stronger effects, but you can only play a single supporter card on each of your turns. On top of that, Pokemon also have a lot of hard ones per turns, just like Yu-Gi-Oh that you have to keep track of when you're going about your turn. The evolution mechanic is also something you have to keep in mind. You can only play basic Pokemon from your hand. Then, on the turn after you play the basic, you can evolve it into a Stage 1 Pokemon. And then finally, it can be evolved into their next Stage 2 versions in a different turn. Then, there's the energy mechanic, which is the closest thing to normal summoning, or land drops in the other two games.
It's the mana system. At the end of the day, so when you're designing a trading card game, or when you're looking at a trading card game, the consideration is going to be, how do you play the game? Do you use a mana system or do you not use a mana system? If you use a mana system, is it going to be like Magic where you have lands, Legend of the Five Rings where you have holdings, which are kind of land adjacent? Do you have an energy system like Pokemon? Or is it going to be like Yu-Gi-Oh where it's very RTFC play thing? Drop the Fiendsmith Engraver, link off the Fiendsmith Engraver for like a Fiendsmith Requiem into something. Like what are you looking for? Hearthstone, where you have a technically resource, you have a mana system, right? With your turns, right? Your turn marker, everything goes up. Naruto technically has a mana system with the chakra system. I actually really like the Naruto CCG. It's one of the best card games I've played, honestly. I actually really enjoyed it. Is there was a risk reward, like, do you charge a thing down to chakra or not? So you have a thing accessible to use a jutsu, right? To use a quote unquote spell, but it's like, well, then you can't use that thing unless the thing obviously is ambush, but then we're starting to get into keywords at that point.
Here, rather than allowing you to develop your board or get more mana, energy is used to pay for your attacks, and it's generally what determines the flow of a game of Pokemon, as if a Pokemon gets knocked out, they lose all their energy.
Yes.
Still, Pokemon is by far the easiest game to pick up of the big three.
I would hardcore agree with this sentiment. Easiest to hardest, Pokemon, Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh. Yu-Gi-Oh at its core, if we're talking from a strictly competitive level, I can go take my Dragapult deck right now, make the couple edits I need to make it standard ready, and I can go play in a tournament right now. With Magic, depends. I don't even know if Modern's played anymore. Commander's kind of killed the rest of the game around it, which is kind of depressing, as I don't really enjoy Commander. But I'm sure, yeah, if there was like a Modern tournament, yeah, I just go and I throw Damnits on board, right? Turn cards sideways, try to win game, right? With Yu-Gi-Oh, there's very much, I build up my board, my opponent tries to crack my board. If my opponent wins and cracks my board, cool, just scoop, go game 2. If they don't win, we've kind of exhausted our resources, a little bit of a build up, some counter plays with hand traps and stuff like that, and then we kind of do it all over again. My least favorite recent memory of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is watching somebody literally solitaire their deck out with Fiendsmith, Light Sworn, Wombo combo, and not talk while they're doing their entire combo. I cannot stand that gameplay. It's just, I don't want to play the game at that point. Give me some interactivity. Laugh with me, joke with me, tell me what you're doing, walk me through. It's not just Autism Simulator, as much as it can be, right? There is etiquette required for games like that. If I'm playing a game of Pokemon and I'm going to activate Charizard here's ability, Infernal Rain, activating effect, right? And then you have, your chance to operate and respond and stuff. Yu-Gi-Oh! Falls into, especially in the hyper-competitive sphere, into a vacuum of just non-communication, and it blows my mind, especially when people will do plays and you want to interrupt that play, but they've already done the play and are two cards ahead. They're not giving you the relevant window to answer.
Being the simplest to play on a second-to-second basis. It's also the only game that doesn't have consistent access to quick effects or instant speed effects.
He is correct. We don't have necessarily an Ash Blossom or an Interrupt. The most interruption you do get is something like Judge and Marnie, anything that anything that will cause your opponent to have to shuffle their hand into their deck. Pokemon also as well operates where the other two, you have to fulfill all criteria, from what I understand. Pokemon, and this is great from a learning, from a ruling perspective, you don't have to fulfill all the criteria. So if we talk about something that everyone's playing in Scarlet and Violet format, Arvin from the Pokemon TCG. So this is supporter, so that's kind of your once per turn. Search your deck for an item card and a Pokemon tool card, reveal them, and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. So naturally, if you're coming from Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic, you're like, okay, well, you must search out an item, and you must search out an item subscript Pokemon tool card, right? And then you reveal them to make sure that you're actually adding the things to hand, you're not adding anything that is not what's said to hand, and then you shuffle your deck, obviously. Except I can choose to just add an item card or just a Pokemon tool card. Or, which blows my mind, you can just choose to fail search even if there's valid targets. Pokemon is a wild TCG that is very forgiving. If you did that in Yu-Gi-Oh! Search out one Sky Striker spell and one Sky Striker monster, but say your 3 Ray and 1 Rose were all in the discard, right? You'd fail search. You don't get the search, right? If you're search out one colorless Planeswalker and all my Karn Liberated, my Karn the Great Creator, my Ugins, whatever I'm running, are all in the discard, I'm assuming I just fail search. There's no legal targets there. And if anything, that could be an illegal activation depending on the game system, because you can't activate a card that you cannot resolve, right? Because there is something to be said for game state being changed. If you are to play a card that you can't play, goes to the discard. Now that can be live for other plays. Pokemon has been a breath of fresh air in its simplicity, and I really love it.
When it's your turn, you're the only one playing, which makes navigating your turns far more simpler. You're never going to try to evolve your Charmander only for your opponent to solemn judgment you.
Yeah.
So, now that we've established which games are most complex, we should know which one is the most difficult, right? Well, that's not necessarily the case. While Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the most complex of the three, that doesn't translate to it being the most deep gameplay.
If we're talking about gameplay depth, if we're talking about modularity of the game, I think Magic does take it out. As blatantly biased as I've said here, right? I have reservations about Magic. L5R is strictly just better. I can go on an L5R tism rant if somebody wants at some point. I can pull up Microsoft Paint. We can have an hour-long VOD for this. Yu-Gi-Oh!, as we've said, is very much at a competitive level. I'm going to build my board. You're going to build your board to try and crack my board. Magic, you're going to be able to have some modularity and some play. So if you're someone like me who's playing Urza lands, trying to build up into Karn, Ulamog, Ceaseless Hunger, etc., right? Sure, there's some playability there. But maybe you're trying to do some weird birthing pod turbo stuff, right? Maybe you're doing red green mana ramp beatdown, right? Or maybe you're like, no, we're not doing that here. We're playing strictly blue because I don't want people to play the game. Okay, we're playing blue because I'm going to counter everything that you do, and you're not playing the game. I think that does have more modularity and complexity, and that is a good point to bring up: difficulty versus complexity. Yu-Gi-Oh! Very much has an established playstyle in modernity, where Magic does have the option to play in different ways. And that is inherently tied to the color system, right? The color system does specific things, right? Where you have Damnation, which is a black card that just destroys all creatures, right? And then you have its off color, which was the color break, right? Where you have Wrath of God, which was the destroy all monsters, destroy all creatures, but in white, right? Like you'll have those occasional color breaks, but for all intents and purposes, your outright kills, death touch, etc., are gonna be in black. Your working together, weenie rush strats, build an army are gonna be generally kind of white, right? And then you're gonna have your control, your slow rolling, right? Your counter spells, that's gonna be in blue. And then you're gonna have I'm gonna have big beefy dude and big beefy dude gonna smash Cactar style. What is the Cactar from the Final Fantasy 14 set, right? Or the Final Fantasy set? It's green. And then if you just want to watch the world burn, if you want to just blitz your opponent like turn 2, what are you running? You're running red. Red deck wins is a deck for a reason, right? So the color system in itself does offer modularity, and that's when you start getting into, well, one of my favorite colors combinations is going to be green-red. I like to ramp up, and I like to hit hard, right? Meanwhile, someone's like, well, I just want to make sure to inflict as much pain and suffering on you as possible, so I play like blue-black, right? So then you start getting into complexity, and then the complexity is now you have to manage not one type of mana, but multiple types of mana, and that's where dual lands get into play, especially when you're shock lands because of tempo, right? Because you'll have your dual lands that tap on entry, but if you get your shock lands, all you do is take 2 damage. You don't care about taking 2 damage if your opponent's already dead, right? You don't care if your opponent can swing at you with Armor Tile, the Chaos Phantom, and Yu-Gi-Oh! For 10,000 damage on their turn, if you just OTK them on your turn, right? Even if you have to pay half your life points to bring something out, right? Like to like a Hero Lives, pre-res map, whatever, to get your combo started, right? It doesn't matter at that point. But those are, I would argue, more advanced concepts, such as you're getting into tempo, you're getting into game design theory, you're getting into color theory when you go into Magic specifically with Color Pie. There are so many discussions to be had here. And L5R kind of had a semblance of that. Like, you had duelists across many clans, right? If you wanted to play generic duelist.deck, at least an Emperor, why are you not playing Crane Clan? Why are you not playing Crane Clan shenanigans, right? Sure, Phoenix has enough duelists, but yeah, you can do that. I mean, there's like the odd keyword duelist in like Scorpion and stuff, but Scorpion's going to have a lot of magistrates. You're going to have a lot of courtiers. They're one of the only clans that has ninja other than Spider in Emperor Edition, right? So you see how developing a system like this, or some sort of like classification, whether it's colors, whether it's clans, whether it's archetypes, elements, right? Or energy types in Pokemon, you see how that can help balance a game. The issue that you run into when balancing a game like this, like balancing a game in general, and I feel like Magic runs into this problem a lot, and I think they've solved it, but somebody far more educated than I am is going to have to really delve into it. Naruto CCG Pain. When you start getting into the Omni colors, right, effectively. So Naruto CCG, we did have access to Pain. Pain was a very, very prominent deck because it was void. It was colorless. Void can only pay for void because it is a lack of elements. However, anything can pay for void. Fire, water, earth, wind, lightning may be used to pay hand cost for void, right? It's effectively treated as colorless. But when you start getting into how Pain accelerated, Pain was effectively... Naruto was really at a competitive level, in my opinion, decided on about turn 4. When you're able to turbo out like turn 4s on turn 2s, Pain led into a lot of degenerative game states, in my opinion. I still play it. I actually still have some Pain stuff. I actually still have my Pain deck now I think about it, including my Outer Paths. But these are all things that you have to like look out for in game design.
Combos are complicated and take some getting used to, Once you learn how to do a combo in Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's not that difficult to perform it in future games. For an example, let's take a look at a typical Snake Eyes combo. The combo for this deck is to use one of your consistency cards to get a Snake Eye Ash. You use it to get the effect of Snake Eye Poplar, which special summons itself with its own effect. Poplar then adds a Snake Eye Spell Trap, which is usually original Sinful Spoil Snake Eye if it wasn't used to start the combo. Then you link off a Poplar for a link 1 and put Poplar into your back row with its effect. You use Ash to send itself and Poplar to summon Snake Eye Oak from deck, which reborns Ash. Then you use Oak to send itself in the link 1 to summon Snake Eye Flameberg Dragon. You send Flameberg and Ash to summon IP Masquerena and trigger Flameberg to resummon 2 of the other snakes. Then you link
Flameberg? I thought it was pronounced Flamberge. I'm so lost.
Off one of them in IP to summon Promethean Princess to use her effect to resummon Flameberg. You then use Flameberg to put IP in the back row, then link off the Princess and Snake Eye to summon Salamangreat Raging Phoenix. Yes, that is complicated and takes a while to memorize, but once you know what to do, it's not difficult to perform.
No.
You do the same thing every time.
Right, you have your play lines. You have your what is your end board, right? Let's say I'm playing Invoked, right? What is my end board? I realistically say playing something like Invoke Shadal want to end up on an end board of something like a Invoked Mechaba and a El Shadal Window, right? If that is what I want to end my board on, what do I do to get that every single time or as consistently as I can? You have an ideal end board. In playing Yubel, I want my Phantom of Yubel up. I preferably would have a Varudris up, and I preferably have probably I'm trying to figure out what else I end on. Varudris is the big one. Phantom of Yubel is the other big one. If I wanted to be cheeky, I guess I go Blue Dog, because at that point I have insurance to be able to yoink a special summon to be able to go to SP Little Knight. How do I build to be able to achieve that the most amount of times as consistently as I can? That is Yu-Gi-Oh! In a nutshell, at least in the modern sense.
Assuming your opponent doesn't interrupt you with hand traps. And that's where most of the actual skill expression and the most difficult decision making comes in. Interaction.
Yes.
The complexity of Yu-Gi-Oh! Combos itself isn't that deep. It's how those combos interact with hand traps and the like, and how combos have to diverge from interactions where the depth comes in.
This is why Ash Blossom, as contentious of a card it is a skill card. Ash Blossom, at the end of the day, you are afforded, assuming people run 3 copies of Ash Blossom, you have 3 chances to stop your opponent's plays. How do you use them? If I were to say, I don't know, if I were to drop a Dark Beckoning Beast on board, activate effective Dark Beckoning Beast, try to go grab a thing, do you Ash Blossom that? Or if I'm able to say also get like a Samsara D Lotus out on board, if I'm trying to activate the effect of Spirit of Yubel and later on in the turn, right? What are you Ash Blossoming? What are you not allowing me to add to hand to disrupt my plays? Right? So Ash is a very high skill ceiling card because it hits good things, but you have to also know how to use it. And this is where we'll get into, people don't actually hate hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh! People hate when they can't play the game. And that's a different issue entirely. No one was complaining about Duel Monsters Kariba, right? Base Kariba, because base Kariba was a hand trap. I don't think people were really complaining about Gores. I don't think people were complaining about Tragoradia, Battle Fader, right? We have how many hand traps in the game? What are the consistent hand traps that cause issues or cause the most contention? The ones that are absolutely power crept just to the moon, right? Your Mulcharmies. Maxi is a card in any format Maxi is, the format warps around Maxi's presence. Even if you're not using Maxi, you have to account for it being in the format. So, as you can tell, I spend way too long talking about these subjects.
The thing is, you can get that kind of decision making from a game without these long, complicated combos. And there are other types of difficult decision making in Magic and Pokemon that don't exist in Yu-Gi-Oh! And vice versa. Ultimately, it's difficult to say what the hardest of these games is, as they each test very different skills and different people will find these games more or less difficult to play based on which of these skills they're naturally better at. Spoilers, that's the conclusion of this video. And we're not going to crown one of these games as the true hardest game for the smartest players. Part of the reason they've all survived for so long is that the games play very differently. and have their own ways of testing players. However, just saying that doesn't mean much. It'd be a lot more interesting to go over the different ways that these games test their players and what makes each one of them more difficult than the others. Returning to Yu-Gi-Oh, since we're on the Yu-Gi-Oh channel for this video, there are two types of decision making mostly unique to this game. One is playing with and against hand traps, and the other is trying to break boards. While Magic does have a few cards similar to hand traps, such as Force of Will and its ilk, 0 mana cards are far less common in the game than hand traps are in Yu-Gi-Oh! Not to mention that most decks aren't going to be trying to pull off a crazy combo in Magic, and even the ones that aren't really going to try and play around cards like Force of Will in the same way you'd play around hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh! Often, what makes or breaks a deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is how well it can play around various hand traps. Right. It's worth pointing out that these hand traps all have very different effects to one another. Playing around Ash Blossom is different to playing around Drone Lockbird or Nibiru. However,
so I like what Yu-Gi-Oh does, unironically, when it comes to how they structure their hand traps, is they have hand traps for effectively most situations, right? Like you have forgotten hand traps like Ghost Reaper, right? You have Ghost Ogre, which does see play here and there. You have plenty of the Mulch Armies. There's so many hand traps, Drone Lockbird being a big one that we see more play as a format approaches tier 0, right? Like they have hand traps that are fixes for a lot of things, and depending on how heavy a format is into something is when we may see certain hand traps see a increase in usage versus others decreasing in usage. I do like having that kind of rotating toolbox. The issue, in my opinion, is when modern decks out of 28 cards out of 40 card decks are just hand traps. I think that there's a fundamental issue if you have over half of your deck, let's say 22 to 40, or sorry, 22 to 28, being just hand traps. I think we've entered a game state that many people do not find enjoyable.
There's comparatively less variety in hand traps in Magic. You mostly have Force of Will and variants of it, which simply say counter target spell at the end of the day. There is some variety with cards like Revenous Trap and Mindbreak Trap and the like, but they see comparatively less play to Force variants, and way less than the far more conditional hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh! Whereas if you're baited in Ash Blossom, you may lead with a search you care less about. But if you're expecting your opponent to droll you, then you need to add your most important card from your deck to your hand first as quickly as possible. And of course, knowing when you actually should use your various hand traps is also a skill. Sure, you can look up a YouTube guide about where to hand trap various decks, but that can only get you so far when it comes to sticky situations.
I agree. This will only get you so far. You do have to have player knowledge and intuition,
where things just aren't going as normal. The hand trap game is something that is emphasized more in Yu-Gi-Oh! Than any other card game out there. Hand traps are mostly relevant on the first turns of the game, whereas breaking apart boards comes up on the second turn of the game. People joke a lot about staring down a board of 3 negates and getting every card in your hand negated. But with how common hand traps are nowadays, this very rarely actually happens. However, you'll probably have to be playing into a board with some amount of disruption, and forcing this disruption out of your opponent properly is key when going second in Yu-Gi-Oh! One of the things that makes this so different to any other card game is that usually you can read all the interactions your opponent has available, but you won't know how they'll use them. You don't know when your opponent will use a Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, and most decks have enough extension that they might be able to play through 1 or 2 pieces of interaction like this. A lot of second turns in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are almost a game of chicken, one player waiting to use their interaction at the most optimal time, while the turn player tries to make them use it prematurely so they can pull off their combo.
Yes.
The fact that the most powerful interactions in the game is on monsters who are all on the field when they can use their effects means that navigating that interaction is kind of flipped to how it works in most other card games. In games like Magic, or even in older Yu-Gi-Oh!, the interaction was on instants or trap cards, and the turn player would make plays and hope that their opponent doesn't have the out. However, in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, the player whose information is all known is the player with the interaction, so the turn player is the only one who needs to have the out in the form of more extension. At the end of the day, these types of high-powered combo-based interactions are the main skill that Yu-Gi-Oh! Tests in the modern day, which is pretty different to how the other 2 biggest games play out. Moving on to Magic,
I think that was a very good summary of Yu-Gi-Oh! I think that, so obviously a video like this is going to just in general garner controversy. You're going to have Magic players having their, their opinions. You'll have Pokemon players having their opinions. You'll have Yu-Gi-Oh players having their opinions. I've played all three. Also, my bias is the Naruto CCG and Legend of the Five Rings. I can tell you where my bias is, what games I've enjoyed more. But I think that honestly was a very fair and good faith, like overall, like summary of Yu-Gi-Oh. If that like the all of these games are going to deal with sequencing, right? How do you play optimally? In Yu-Gi-Oh, like he says, you know that there's interaction. You know that there's going to be hidden information like in people's hands, and you have to be able to play through that. So you have to sequence your plays where maybe I won't shotgun the Samsara D Lotus right off the bat. Maybe I'll try to crack my opponent. Maybe I'll just play like a pre-raise map, right? Where you're able to pay half your life points, search for a normal summonable, search for a card from your deck, right? Monster card. And it's like, okay, does my opponent ash that? My opponent has not ashed that. Okay, cool. Well, I grabbed a Dark Beckoning Beast. I guess I'll Dark Beckoning Beast. You gonna stop me from grabbing my Opening the Spirit Gates? Nope. Cool. Opening the Spirit Gates. Additional normal summon. Samsara D Lotus. Oh, so now we're hitting the Lotus. Okay. So, and then you've baited out the Lotus at that point, but you already have certain advantages, right? You're sequencing in a way where you're playing under effects, whether that's going to be something like a skill on field, like a skill drain, whether you're playing under Dark Ruler No More, or you're playing under the imminent threat of, say, a Maxi or another hand trap. You're sequencing your plays in a way that you maximize the value going into your turn. Whereas something like Pokemon, you're making sure to sequence things correctly to maximize the value in your hand and that you can slam on board. So, for example, me playing Dragapult, pulling up and okay, well, my Dracloaks are going to be awesome. I need to make sure I'm going to use my Dracloak Scouting. Cool. Say I have 2 Dracloaks on board. Scouting 1-2. Cool. Grab that. Second Scouting 1-2. Okay, grab that. I say, and then I wouldn't evolve up into Dragapult first, right? I evolve up into Dragapult. Well, crap. Now I can't use my Dracloak Scouting ability. You see how I'm not sequencing correctly? Or well, I have 3 energy in hand. I'm good for the next couple turns. Well, I'm going to Professor's Research, discard my hand, draw a new 7. Well, now I don't have any energy. And now I don't have ability to further my turn at that point. So I've sequenced incorrectly. So you're allowed to evolve Pokemon effectively if they've been there since the start of the turn, right? Outside of your first turn. You can't evolve them unless the card says otherwise. Certain EVs do it, right? But then you're also allowed to attach 1 energy per turn, like a hard attachment. Think of it like playing a land per turn, but you're attaching it to a creature, right? And if I forego that, suddenly now I'm just behind. I have lost value because I'm not sequencing correctly. With Magic, at least from what I've played of it, it very much seems like you're sequencing it to maximize all of these are maximizing value, but I think in slightly different ways. You're maximizing the value of each turn to gain more and more advantage to be able to threshold and just gank your opponent. That's at least my take on it. I'm sure there's a more nuanced and educated take on the subject, but it is very much a skill to sequence things, and something I will argue that helps me in the real world. How do I sequence certain things to make sure that I have the most success, right? If I'm going to, if I'm going to build something, does it make sense to sequence clearing out an area, making sure I have time, making sure there's plenty of light and I have all the potential tools on hand, right? Versus F it, we ball, right? It's why when I do say everything comes back to Legend of the Five Rings, I have pulled so much out of that game that is useful in everyday life.
A game most similar to Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic also has a lot of instant speed interaction and hand trap equivalents. However, as we talked about before, they have far less hand trap style cards. Most interaction will be in the form of standard instant spells, which require keeping up mana to be used on your opponent's turn. We talked about this a bit before, but it's worth saying that this is a skill all on its own. Knowing if you need to develop your board or if your resources are better spent trying to stop your opponent is something that comes with time. And it's a skill that games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon don't test, thanks to just how different their resource systems are.
Tron doesn't test that. Are you serious? To be fair, Tron is kind of like the weird problem child, right? In certain aspects where it doesn't play the game like the rest of the game does, right? I have my Ancient Stirrings, I have my colorless stuff, I have my artifacts, right? Cool, Karn Liberated hit board. Awesome. We're gonna have fun.
Another big difference between Magic and the other two card games are its draw and search power, or more specifically, the lack of draw and search power in Magic. While Magic does get cards like Quick Study that allow you to simply draw 2 cards, whereas Pot of Greed is taking an extensive vacation on Yu-Gi-Oh's ban list, the actual impact of these cards is diminished in the average game. Since you have to spend mana on draw spells that you can't spend on playing creatures or playing interaction, many decks play few to no cards that allow them to draw or search cards out of their deck. Whereas nowadays, most Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon decks can draw half their decks on their first turn if they want to. This means that Magic is often less a game of finding a particular card that you need to win the game, and more one making the best with what cards you do find. While
sequencing to maximize your board, right, like we've said.
There are decks built around particular cards. These are usually dedicated combo decks. The average deck is built to be able to play even if you never draw a single copy of a particular card, which changes deck building and how you have to play the game turn by turn. Magic is a game about playing around variants and top decks, and playing to your outs, or playing around what cards you could draw that could potentially win you the game. It's just more emphasized here than in the other card games. Magic also has a very different combat system to Yu-Gi-Oh!, with keywords like flying and menace changing what creatures can block what, making attacking and blocking a much more involved process. Combine this with the various combat tricks, and you have the most complex combat system out of the 3 games. Magic is also the only game of the 3 with voluntary mulligans. Rather than being stuck with your opening hand, you can choose to shuffle it back and then draw a new 7 cards.
He's correct. Pokemon's system is an involuntary mulligan. Yu-Gi-Oh! Does not have a mulligan system. So in Pokemon, you have to bench at least 1 basic, what's going to be your active, or else you have to reveal to confirm to your opponent that you do not have a basic in your hand. You will shuffle back, and your opponent may, not will, may draw an extra additional card. I actually really like mulligan systems. I think that when we talk about Naruto had a really good mulligan system. I think if I remember correctly, it was draw 6. You could then say, nah, I don't want this. So then we'll just shuffle back, draw, and then you draw 5. Nah, I hated this. Shuffle back, draw 4. I think you could go down to 3. I don't remember if there was a hard mulligan limit. It's been a while. I do like games with mulligan rules, as sometimes oh god, I play Yu-Gi-Oh! And I brick so much. I hate it. Like, I'll play optimal decks, and I brick every single game. And my opponent has, like, the one of every single game. It's why I'm just like, dude, like, there's gotta be some funny business going on. Like dude had miscellaneous auras, like, 3 games in a row. Like, come on now.
But every time you do this, you have to put 1 extra card from your hand on the bottom of your deck when you finish mulliganing. Learning how to properly mulligan is a skill that Magic players have to learn that is unique to it versus some other card games, including Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon. Magic has a lot of the same complexities of Yu-Gi-Oh!, and its combo decks do involve some of the same skills. But its lower power level in terms of search and draw, as well as its combat system, shifts the focus of the game to something very different. And finally, we have the easiest game to pick up, Pokemon. Whereas Magic had the same quick effect interaction that Yu-Gi-Oh! Had, Pokemon shares its long, combo-y turns as players try to set up their board and play various item and supporter cards to find their important pieces. The way you go about doing these combos is also very different, as Pokemon has by far the best draw power of the 3 games, but worse search power than Yu-Gi-Oh! Overall, meaning that its combo lines diverge far more than Yu-Gi-Oh! Combos do.
Yeah.
For example, if you're playing Gardevoir EX, the goal of your deck is to evolve a Ralts all the way to Gardevoir while filling your discard with psychic energy that Gardevoir can get back. Then, you power up attackers like Screamtail out of nowhere, usually ones that take advantage of the fact that attacking energy with Gardevoir requires damaging them. To do this, you use cards like Earthen Vessel and Ultra Ball to discard extra energy in your hand, which requires first adding those energies to hand or drawing into them.
You can also, if you're running into bunch of energies, use Professor's Research. Professor's Research, you discard your hand, even if your current hand after playing it is 0 to draw 7. Cool, you have 3 psychic energy in hand. Sure, awesome, draw Professor's Research, just pitch everything to hand to draw 7. Oh, sweet, awesome reload.
The combo is less a series of individual lines the deck can do, and more a general end goal that your cards are all trying to work towards. Another really important difference between Pokemon and the other games is how few cards interact with the discard pile, what both other games call their graveyard. The best you'll usually get is a few cards that shuffle cards from your graveyard back into your deck, like maybe a card like Fisherman, which lets you pick up some energy cards from your discard pile and put them back in your deck. There are also very few cards with effects while they're in the discard pile, like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh have, and almost no cards that let you put cards from your discard pile into play. This means that cards that go to your discard are effectively gone for good. This makes managing the cards you have left in your deck a skill all on its own.
And that's when you actually run into you can in fact professors research so aggressively that you actually have to worry about deck out. And I've done it a couple times where it's like, oh my God, I've literally had nothing, so I'm having to dig super hard. But it's not like Yu-Gi-Oh, where like if you're playing Burning Abyss, right, you're just like, bro, I'll discard my deck all day. I'll discard all of that. Dark Worlds even, especially if it's discarding it for effect versus cost, right? Like, sure, Shadal wants to discard all day. And then it's like, okay, then you have options to bring things back. You have options to recur things, right? In Pokemon, sure, you have like your occasional like Super Rod or something like that. But like, the reason Crushing Hammer can be really oppressive, and Enhance Hammer if you're running against a lot of special energy, is because you literally set your opponent back a turn, right? So like, your attach energy, opponent goes next. I played Crushing Hammer in a turn or two, so I played 4 of it when during Sword and Shield format before the virus hit, right? Like, just you play Crushing Hammer because you're trying to disrupt your opponent on heads. Grats, your energy is now gone. Like that last turn, you are now like staggered now. Effectively, you want to make sure you're ensuring that energy drop on every single turn as much as you can, because it's just it's so important. I can't stress in Pokemon how important that energy drop is every single turn. And so yeah, things like Crushing, it hurts to have Crushing Hammer because then it's no longer on your field. It's in the discard. You have to fish that out of the discard via some way, shape, or form, or that's just gone for the game, right? If I use my Ace spec, right, it's generally just gone for the game. Sure, yes, there's things that can bring things back to my hand, absolutely, but they are less common than Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic.
Whereas this is usually seen as a non-issue in Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh. There's also the fact that Pokemon has no sideboard, which means that any tech cards you want to play for particular matchups have to be played in your main deck at all times. This can be a real headache if your deck is weak to cards like Darkness Ablaze Decidueye, whose Deep Forest Camo ability stopped it from taking any damage from any Pokemon V or Pokemon GX, which were the strongest Pokemons in the game at the time. This card could wall an entire deck off. And if you weren't prepared to deal with it in Game 1, you just weren't ever going to be able to stop the card. This makes the 60 card deck slots precious in Pokemon, and deck building properly is a real challenge. Even if you do have ways to get around these tech cards, you'll only have a few. And since reoccurring cards in the discard is so difficult, losing it could mean you just lost the game. So, in summary, Yu-Gi-Oh is a card game about performing and stopping powerful combos and baiting out quick effect or instant speed interaction. Magic is a game about combat and managing probability. And Pokemon is a game about performing your combos while keeping track of all of your available resources. If you play these games for any meaningful amount of time, you'll quickly realize just how different they feel to play. And in fact, you may learn a thing or two that makes you better at your game of choice. Personally, I, the scriptwriter, can say that after getting into Pokemon for a while, I looked at both Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic differently and got a lot better at both. Talking about whose game is harder or more skilled mostly serves to pat people's egos more than it does to accurately describe any of the games or their player bases. If this weren't true, you'd see people crossing over into other card games and winning all the prize support without even trying. And that just doesn't happen. We'd all be better off trying to learn what we can, or just saying that a game isn't for you and moving on.
I like that conclusion. I think that conclusion is, I think the video was great. I think this was really good. I think it was very well thought out, and I think that it was a good presentation. And I think that as well, learn from different games. The more you learn, the more you educate yourself, the more you're going to be able to improve in other areas as well, right? Maybe it's one of those things where maybe you try to wrap your head around L5R and how that's structured and how limiteds versus opens work, and suddenly you're like, okay, no, I think these interaction makes a little bit more sense, right? Or you play something like Pokemon, right, where you have to sequence things to maximize the value that you're given, right? And then you're like, okay, then you play Magic, and you're like, oh, well, maybe I don't need to take this mulligan because, well, I could honestly, I have one land starting out. I have another way that I can get some draw power going, or another way that I can, be able to get certain things going. I could make this work. And then you go to Yu-Gi-Oh, and you're just like, well, I don't have a mulligan system. I know what my end board's going to be, and I know how to sequence my plays in the most optimal capacity that I can bait out the Ash, play under any of these traps, and be able to win the game, right? So it's always good, and in my opinion, to learn more, to be more educated, because it helps you in other aspects of your life as well. Like, I can explain why cavalry is amazing because of L5R. As it turns out, movement is tech, like we used to say. As it turns out, if you just have horses and everyone says, nah, we're going to go defend our house over here, the guys with horses are just going to go, I see that you're defending over here. We're going to go to your summer house and we're going to beat up your summer house. And suddenly you're still losing military advantage because the unicorn clan, being the unicorn clan with horses, decides, knock, knock, we're taking your house. Like, and then you can apply that obviously to military combat as well in the real world, where it's, wow, as it turns out, if you just have superior movement, you can do a lot more. You can do some flanking maneuvers. You can go to places that were thought not necessarily possible before. Being mobile keeps you from, potentially just getting zeroed in for artillery, right? Like, building up multiple skill sets and world understanding by using basic concepts. But I digress. What are your thoughts? I thought this was good. I definitely have a bias against Magic in my opinion, but I hope that I was able to showcase I'm willing to be fair. I'm willing to, hear out arguments, and I think that this was honestly a good video and recommend that you go ahead and watch it. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it is subjective. What is the most complex to you? Thank you for watching. Really do appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next one.